Now, South Africans provoked to anger over former President FW de Klerk's recent denial that apartheid was a crime against humanity will be protesting in Cape Town today. The picket is scheduled to take place outside the FW de Klerk Foundation offices under the hashtag De Klerk Must Fall. This outrage has sparked debate on the legal framework of apartheid, while de Klerk, through his foundation, has issued an apology. The incident has raised questions about his complicity in some of the human rights violations uncovered by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And people are now asking why de Klerk was never charged. To unpack some of these questions, I'm joined in studio by human rights lawyer and former TRC Commissioner, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza. Advocate Ntsebeza, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Now, over the past 27 years, FW de Klerk has made many controversial comments and statements in an apparent attempt to almost whitewash apartheid and his role. He's done it again, this time publicly and in a very insensitive manner. Also issued an apology for his comments. Was this apology acceptable? What do you think of it?
There's a problem, it's the kind of apology you say, I apologize, but, and you find that when the person says but, there's more in the but, or what follows the but, that negates the apology. So the apology was hollow, and that would be the same observation that one makes when he was interviewed as to whether apartheid was a crime against humanity. And firstly, he was a denialist there, because I would never have thought that, in 2020, anyone would not know that this was a convention of the United Nations that was taken so many years ago, declaring apartheid to be a crime against humanity.
Now, we know that he hasn't had, his odious past wasn't unknown. And just looking at his history, and what we know about the time when government took the stance of choosing reconciliation over retribution. Looking at the years that have passed and what we're witnessing in 2020, surely that should speak to some sort of action. Is it possible now to open a murder charge against him?
Well, I'm not so sure that, I don't think that there's a limit to the time within which you can charge anyone with a crime such as murder. But I think our ANC-led government must take the blame for having failed to carry out recommendations that we in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission made. One of which was that people who had applied for amnesty but had not been granted amnesty because they did not make a full disclosure should be prosecuted. Or people who should have known that they must come to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for all kinds of violations of human rights, let alone gross violations of human rights, which was defined in the Act. Now, all of those people, if you knew that you had to come and apply for amnesty, but you didn't, then the law was very clear. From 1998, people should have been prosecuted. And we sent to the Department of Justice, it's now called Department of Justice and Constitutional Development. Yes. We sent to them, a number of files. And I think one could talk about 200 or so individual cases, which we said, investigate these cases, because we are not able to investigate everything. But if you investigate these cases, there is something to be answered by those whom you can charge. They sat on their hands. They lay on their hands. They never did anything. In fact, there are only 2 cases that I'm aware of that were prosecuted. One by Mthunzi Mahaga, when he was a prosecutor in the so-called Transkei. And that was the only successful prosecution. But there were many people who could have been prosecuted. Yeah.
You were there when the story broke of the Northcrest suburb in Mthatha, where the killing of 5 children were, where that was a huge story. The guy who authorized it is the same man that we're speaking of now.
Oh, yes.
That killing. And of course, it raises so much more when you look at that history. Just talk us through what you uncovered at the time. I mean, you exploded information that was not known at the time.
I remember that day as if it was yesterday. I think it was the 8th of October, 1993. In the morning, Sgqibo Mpendulo phoned me. There were no cell phones those days, but at least he knew my home. And then he said, please, can you come here, D? And I went over to his office. It's terrible. Young person. I think his sons, they were twins, Sadat and Samora, and they were friends of theirs. They had been killed in their sleep. I mean, and de Klerk not only admitted that he had authorized the attack on that house in Northcrest, but he never apologized at that stage to say, I was misled by my intelligence. That was not an Azanian People's Liberation Army, APLA, because the justification for attacking that house was that, it was a hideout for APLA operatives.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, on the night, you sent a group, an attacking group of trained army people. I mean, was there no way in which they could have cordoned around, assuming they thought they were so-called terrorists there? I mean, that the way in which there was devastation. When I got there, I couldn't believe that these young kids were in their sleep, and when those commandos got in there, simply fired without even attempting to establish who was there. It was cold-blooded murder, and we proceeded on that basis when I, as an attorney at that time, represented the Mpendulo family and the other families in suing the Minister of Justice at the time. But because the Minister of Justice was Dala Omar, we settled the matter. But they paid compensation.
It's really heart-wrenching to have to hear, this detailed account that you speak of. Now, was it not the spirit of the TRC at the time to get the truth from perpetrators and really get them to genuinely apologize to the victims?
You have hit it on the nail there. Your nail on the head there. The reconciliation was always premised on people disclosing, making a full disclosure of all the acts and actions in relation to which they wanted to apply for amnesty. So you would only be, forgiven or be pardoned or get amnesty if you made a full disclosure of all relevant facts in relation to which you wanted to be absolved from prosecution or civil action. So it was understandable at the time because there was, I think, the people sitting in Parliament when they debated the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act, 34 of 1995, which was the act under which the TRC was formed. They must have tried to find a way in which there would be a revelation of all the atrocities that had taken in the past between 1960, when the ANC and the PAC decided to take armed, action against, the Republic. The ANC formed Mkondo Wesizwe, the PAC formed Poko.
Yeah.
Now, though they decided that it does not assist us, trying to plead peacefully with the regime, let's take arms against it. Now, that was the year that the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act stated as the year from 1960 to 1994, 10th of May 1994, when President Mandela was the first post-apartheid, president of a constitutional republic. Now, that is the 34 years of South African history that we were asked to interrogate. Now, people were given an opportunity for a year. Come and apply for amnesty. And then, as I always say, even though there were several criteria for the granting or refusal of amnesty, it was clear to us that full disclosure was one on which the amnesty committee decided as to whether you should be granted or refused amnesty. Now, Mr. de Klerk, who was responsible, who had ordered, if he thought, it was correct for him, for instance, and I'll sing only this instance, to order the murder of, children who were killed in their sleep. Now, if he thought that that was right, it was a military operation that was justified, then he should he should have been able to go and say that in a criminal court of law. If our government had decided that what he did, the authority gave for that raid in Northcrest was justified, he should have gone to the TRC to apply for amnesty. Or our government, the NPA, should have prosecuted him. I'm not so sure now, to answer to your question, it's a long way of answering your question. I'm not so sure now, so many years after the event, that they can still prosecute him. But stranger things have happened in this country.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Advocate
You're welcome.
Ntsebeza. Just really answering some of those pressing questions there around FW de Klerk. Of course, we know that protesters are gearing up this morning to say that some action needs to be taken against FW de Klerk with the hashtag FW de Klerk must fall. Of course, we'll take you live there as soon as those protesters get underway.